It was in South Sudan. You disappeared.
Yeah.
Your partner, she had a tracker on you, which had stopped. From her perspective, for 2 weeks, she didn't know where you were.
Yeah.
Interpol got involved. Conversations were even happening in parliaments.
Yeah. So I ended up spending my birthday in prison, just being shouted at by some soldier.
This is a journey which is kind of beyond comprehension. You crossed 21 countries, a distance of 13,000 kilometers from Cape Town to London.
The focus or the message is very much about human migration. Every single person on this planet actually comes from Africa, and migration is a very crucial part of humanity.
Every single one of those countries had its own struggles.
There was some cars trying to kind of force me off the road. I felt scared, but I didn't want to show that. The guy at the back, he signed a sign of like, look, you need to get out of here quickly, otherwise we're going to cut your throat.
You put your life on the line for this journey.
I needed to show them that I'm here to do this, regardless of what they say.
Your journey transcends not just the history of human migration, but it touches on the very fundamental part of what we are seeing today.
The journey was leading me to go and discover that part of migration. What happens to some people that actually do migrate, they disappear without a trace.
Welcome back, Deo, in many senses of the phrase, back on the podcast, but also back into UK life.
Yeah.
How's the body, first of all?
Body is okay, but I do have an injury. So I have an injury at the back of my hip, and that is a bit painful when I'm walking. But it's something that's going to take some time to recover, to be able to heal properly. So I'm resting as much as I can. So it's kind of like forced rest anyway, so I don't have to kind of like just keep moving for the sake of keeping moving. But annoyingly, it happened right at the end of the actual journey.
How many days left did you have this pain?
I think I had a week.
Okay.
Before it had, when it happened, and it was quite really, really painful. On the day when I really felt it, I actually had to stop the run for that day, and then try to figure out what to do, and then I can come back again the next day and carry on. Yeah.
It's remarkable that you lasted so long, though. Actually, before a serious injury kind of came and gave you some significant pain. That is quite lucky, because what you've achieved, and we'll go into the stats in a minute, but
yeah,
to go a year and a half with no real significant injury that meant you were able to still continue running every day. It's somewhat, poetic that you have something, because, you can't get away with doing something so grand without some kind of scar. You say, I think you mentioned it's a dent in your body. I've witnessed you limping around at the moment, and even walking is quite a struggle. Yeah,
walking is a struggle. Just to be able to walk from, like, let's say a kilometer, it's not easy. And if I'm going up like an incline, and it's okay, but when I'm going down, that's when I really feel it the most. But it is remarkable that I have actually gone for such a long time without an injury. I had niggles, of course, but I've managed my body the best way I could. Like, it's part of being really meticulous in terms of like how I listen to my body, manage it, look after it. Like every single day, I would like before I start and after I finish, I would like go into my body and make sure that I'm trying to, let's say, iron out any niggles that I may have, so I can be able to run smoothly. And then when I finish, I do try to follow the same process, and then I can rest and be able to feel fresher in the morning.
What kind of things did that involve when you were checking in with your body before and after a run? Was it stretching? Was it rolling?
Yeah. The main thing is, like, I was traveling with a massage gun. So the main thing, I was using the massage gun like before the run and then afterwards as well. So when I'm relaxing, once I finish the run, I just pull out the massage gun and just use it. Of course, gently on the body, like especially the tender parts. And that would really help to like relax the body and relax the muscles. And then I feel fresher. At the beginning, I was stretching and making sure that I could do the stretches, but I figured and I realized that it was taking more time for me to be able to, like I wasn't feeling too relaxed when I do it. And the space wasn't always there. Sometimes I'm sleeping in the car, so I don't have the option to be able to like stretch and feel comfortable. So the massage gun kind of like plays a massive part into that.
Well, that's remarkable that you've lasted so long without significant injury. Sorry to hear that you are struggling, but I know that time and a lot of rest will fix you slowly. It must be incredibly frustrating. You've been on the move for a year and a half. We'll go into the stats actually, because this is a journey which is kind of beyond comprehension. A journey that took 518 days from when you set off in Cape Town, South Africa, finishing near the end of December 2024 in London. Of those 518 days, the vast majority of them you ran. I think you ran every single day for well over a year.
I think it was 300 and something around 15, 18. 308, 15 or 18, yeah.
Before you took a day off.
A forced day off.
Yes,
yeah.
Okay, we'll come to that. The distance of 13,000 kilometers. Over that, 13,245, I think was your total. If you take that, you work out an average distance that you traveled per day. And the average is 25 kilometers that you traveled per day across the entire 518 days. That is an incredible stat by its own measure. 25 kilometers every day for a week is some challenge for people. To do it for a month can be beyond comprehension. To do it averaging across the period of a year and a half is phenomenal.
Yeah. That's the first time I actually had that stat of 25 kilometers per day. So that's mind-blowing.
100,000 meters elevation, which is the equivalent of 11 Everests. You were running sometimes multiple ultras in a week. You crossed 21 countries. I'll just briefly run through them. South Africa, where you started, into Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania, into Uganda, temporarily in Kenya, but backtracked, then went through South Sudan, and then you were in Egypt, and that completed your African leg, and then you began your European leg in Greece, with Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, Austria, Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, France, and then back home to the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Just even considering the vast number of countries you've covered, I can read it out in a list and it takes me 10, 15 seconds. But every single one of those countries had its own struggles and its own stories, some of which we'll cover today, but there's a vast number which we cannot even go into. How do you feel looking back now at this and seeing, hearing those stats and hearing all those countries rolled off just effortlessly by myself?
Yeah. I feel exhausted actually hearing those countries read back, because it's I also was talking, and we went to the stats of that was more than 300 marathons, and I had not looked into that. I hadn't thought of that as well. I just okay, just get one country out of the way and another country out of the way. But some of these countries are huge. I spent quite a long time in some of the countries and with a lot of challenges. So I was just living in that moment. And a lot of the time it was just more of just get through the day. So the stats weren't really what I was focusing on. It was just more of like, let's just get today out of the way. Maybe I do a marathon today based on where I can be able to find accommodation or somewhere I can sleep. Or sometimes I just do over a marathon, ultra distance, just to be able to cover a distance, or based on visa expiry dates. That's also another thing I was chasing, to make sure that I get to the finish before the visa expires. So I was just living in the moment, try to get it out of the way.
We've talked about these stats, and it's something to celebrate, I think, in hindsight, when you've achieved it all and you can look back, and it gives people a grand sense of the scale on the journey that you have been on in a very physical sense, and somewhat emotional sense. I think people can understand that is, physically very demanding, but also it's going to take its toll mentally. But I know one thing about you when you finish this is you're very keen for this journey not to be about the stats.
Yeah. The focus or the message is very much about human migration, and migration is a very crucial part of humanity. And for us to be able to move freely is important to the development of the world. And for me to be able to highlight that part mainly instead of the stats was incredibly that's my goal. That's what I wanted to highlight the most. I know that, we can look at the stats and try to be able to show the depth of how the journey, happened, how it progressed and how you can break it down. By migration is the main topic for this whole journey.
You started your journey in Cape Town, and you wanted to finish in London.
Yeah.
Why did you pick those two specific locations to complete this journey?
It's part of my experience as well. My experience is as a person who came from Africa, and then I migrated into London and the UK. Being in London, or living and growing up in London, have had experiences of racial abuse, particularly, and a lot of people would have experienced, that look like me, would have been told to go back to where they come from. And going back to where you come from is saying that go back to Africa. However, when you actually peel back the layers, and there will be a lot of layers you have to uncover, you find that every single person on this planet actually comes from Africa. And Cape Town, South Africa, I decided to go there and start from there because it's one of the areas where we find the earliest remains of people. And that was significant in its own right, but also because South Africa has had a real significant role, or its own real struggles in terms of segregation and the apartheid, which only ended 30 years ago. That's something to tell as part of the journey. I started at the Long March to Freedom monument in Central City in Cape Town, and that's where they commemorate a lot of the significant Black figures in history that had relations with South Africa, but it's part of breaking down racial injustices, breaking down the apartheid, and mainly because Nelson Mandela was one of those figures. So starting there was really significant.
So you've talked about these inspiring figures. You yourself were once inspired to make a stand yourself in a way that was a peaceful form of protest against racial injustice. We talked about it on our last podcast before you left, and I'll signpost people to go and listen to that if they have the time. But for those who haven't or don't know your story, could you just sum up a little bit about your campaign Running for Justice that you started approximately, was it 4 years or 3 years before you left for this journey?
Yeah. So this journey was the 4th year of that movement. So I started the Running for Justice 381 Days movement in 2020, and that was off the back of the murder of George Floyd. So I decided to do something about it, and researching into history, I discovered that there was a Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama that lasted for 381 days before they were able to end segregation on buses.
This is the story that Rosa Parks became famous for.
Yes,
she
Rosa
refused
Parks
to give her seat up on the bus. Yeah,
exactly, and that actually gave way to the rise of Martin Luther King Jr. That was the start of his civil rights campaign to become this great figure. And so knowingly that lasted for 381 days, I decided to run 10 kilometers every single day for 381 days as part of a protest, and also to raise awareness against police brutality and racial injustice around the world, not just in the UK or America. So I ran 10 kilometers every day as a minimum, and I didn't drop that any day at all. I actually ran every single day. And I ended up finishing in London at 10 Downing Street, and I took a knee in front of 10 Downing Street to protest. It was quite a powerful protest, having finished a full 381 days of running, which I had never done a consecutive run streak before, but I just decided that is a reason to actually do it and actually stick to it. Yeah.
And that was your first cycle of this, which just over a year in terms of time to complete that 381 days. That then continued the next day, where the community actually took on the baton, and various people took turns to run 10 kilometers for the next 381 days.
Yeah.
And that continued into a third cycle. And then at the end of every cycle, at the end of every one of those 381 days, you led a group run, which finished at 10 Downing Street. And you just mentioned about the run you did before flying to South Africa. That was the very end of the third cycle of this. Where the community had again taken the baton for 381 days, you were taking it back.
Yeah.
You finished the run. We had a leaving party for you in Hammersmith. And then that evening you flew to South Africa and then began this journey the very next day. You hoped it would take 381 days. I'm sure you thought it was going to be a minimum of that time. And as we know, it's taken a lot longer.
Yeah.
I think a journey like this, there's always going to be things that you just cannot comprehend. Could you break down a little bit about how practically on a day-to-day basis you were able to, or what you did to complete this distance by foot?
Yeah. Breakdown is actually kind of hard as well, because we started by planning, of course, before I left, and we had a route which was to follow. We had figured it out, breaking it down to at least 40 kilometers a day, and that would fit into the 381 days by the finish. And, you start off, and then once you start off, then you actually get to fully get a grasp of how the journey is going to go. So a vehicle was to travel with me all the way, the whole journey, let's say. And then that we have a driver, and that driver was to stay with me all the time. And within that is that every time I finish a run, we go to accommodation, or we plan kind of ahead to have accommodation where I'm going to stop. Or sometimes if there's nowhere to stay, then I just stay where I finish, and that would require maybe sleeping in a car, or just pull out a tent and sleep somewhere in the tent. So yeah, I would have a driver with me most of the journey. And throughout Africa, I had a driver with me. And that changed when we went into Europe.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. Okay, so it's you and one other person on the road, going day by day, completing the run, trying to find your food, water, and shelter, and your own little struggles that came with that. But also you had some help back home as well.
Yes. Remotely, let's say, I had help. I started off with a team of, I think, 8 people. So I had Alice as the project manager, and then her with Trina, another friend. And in Cape Town as well, I had Pax, who's a good friend from the Adidas running community, who was supporting me on the ground as well. So I started with him as a driver for like a week before we had a driver come in that was going to go with me for the full length of Southern Africa. And then I had, a medical support team, and I had like a background team as well, who's supporting with logistics, finding accommodation, anything that could creep up, and also trying to get publications and promoted throughout the journey.
Yeah, and limited funds.
Unlimited funds, yeah.
Yeah, which is actually really interesting to highlight, because this became a struggle multiple times throughout your journey when you were running low on funds. And that's when you had a little crowdfunder where you reached out to your community, and little times when they had little boosts gave you that extra hope that you could continue for the next few weeks, because that was a real kind of bottleneck in whether you could actually complete this journey.
Yeah. Wow. To be honest, like, I would thank every single person that has contributed to helping me to get to the finish. And that was a massive help in terms of actually finishing this journey and telling the journey properly, is because I had those people helping me through the GoFundMe page. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have been able to finish. So yeah, and also, sponsors as well that have sponsored Adidas Terex and Adidas Runners have been the main sponsor for this project, and kit. So yeah, it's not having a community that supports and understands the project and the journey, I think I wouldn't have been able to make it.
It was somewhat, I think, unfortunate that at the time that you were completing the journey, there was someone else also completing a similar journey, running across Africa, who did it in a very different circumstance, very completely different person, different reasons, who also just is seemingly very good at being a social media personality that people just really subscribe to. You're a completely different personality, and you can't change that. That's just who you are.
Yeah.
And the reasons why you're doing this, I think, are so much more profound and so much more deeper. But people don't necessarily want that. They want to see some kind of personality talking about, how they're pushing their body to the absolute limits, and not hear the kind of deeper story around that. It says something a little bit about the state of social media and what people want to consume. But I do think that your campaign is something that it's got real purpose and meaning, that it's got a real heart to it, a deep foundation, and that if it builds slowly over time, then it will just build stronger as a result, rather than being something that's fickle, that's just in the short term that people will forget about later.
That's exactly it. You're playing the long game rather than playing the shorter game, of like being recognized a lot quicker and then things might change, but the whole point of this is actually to stick at this for as long as possible. It's about inspiring the next generation to not only just do something, but do something to the best and stick at it no matter what happens, knowingly that you're going to have obstacles along the way, knowingly there's going to be a lot of challenges. But if this is something you desire so much, and it's something that's going to pay off in the long run, when we talk about migration and inspiring people, it's something that's going to take a long time to actually be able to see the results. And there was actually three other people who were running in Africa, doing a challenge at the same time as I was, and a massive kudos to them for actually being able to finish. And like I would say their names, you've got Russ Cook, you've got Keith Boyd, and I've got Fritz, the Fritz brothers. And the thing is, we are the only ones who really know how it's like to run at this scale through Africa. Not many other people will be able to know that. And there was kind of like a bit of a good mutual understanding between all of us, which is nice. Because when you do something like this, you need some kind of like mutual understanding and support from everybody. And but it's part of playing the long game. It's not a quick fix. I'm not just touching about migration, I'm touching about racism. Not many people want to hear, listen to racism, and not many people want to hear like somebody's being told like, okay, I'm doing this because I'm trying to fight against racial injustice. So the topic becomes political instead of an entertainment. I'm not here for entertainment. I'm here for the real issues. And those real issues matter to me personally, because of my experience. My color plays a massive part of me being where I am and where I live. So I'm in this for the long game. Yeah.
You said it was a lot of what your messaging is that it is political, but this is not just a political subject. This is a story of humanity that has been a story which we have seen across generations. Migration has been, from the very earliest instance you've talked about, the very first humans we have evidence came from the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
And science now suggests that we were all from the continent of Africa. This is the messaging you're really keen to push. But I mean, this is millions of years ago, and talking about where humanity started. But migration has always been a fundamental part of humanity going forward, and we see it more and more today in many levels, through asylum seekers fleeing war-torn countries or areas of land that are changed because of climate change. It's a very current topic. So your journey transcends not just the history of human migration from Africa to the rest of the world, but it touches on the very fundamental part of what we are seeing today and have seen for generations.
Yeah, migration isn't going to stop. That's something that's not going to stop. So we need to accept that. And we have always migrated for a reason. Firstly, we always migrated for climate change, and climate change has always been part of our reason for migration, to be able to go from a very hot environment and for to go somewhere which is more reasonably comfortable to live in and be able to grow the likes of crops that we can be able to eat. That's always been part of our migration journey. And the earliest remains are found in East Africa, and Ethiopia is where we find the earliest human remains, a lady called Lucy. And that's where you find that migration started from. That's where humanity started from, and we migrated going down south of Africa, and then the rest of the people going up into northern Africa, and eventually crossing into the Arab area on the Middle East, and branching off to go to Asia and then Europe and other areas of the world. But that's how migration has been playing its part, because one, we migrating for climate, we're migrating for opportunities, migrating because of conflict, and today that's quite a big part of why people are migrating. There's over 120 million people displaced today. That's the highest number we've ever seen in history. And that tells a real significant reason to put migration at the forefront of everyday life, that it's things, and it's only increasing. There's more wars happening now, and as we go into what we're going to be talking about, is I was in Uganda and I had 3 wars around me, and looking around and trying to figure out which way I'm going to take, which direction I should be taking. It was difficult because there's people who are fleeing war, and all those people need to go somewhere, and you could say there's not enough space, but there is plenty of space, to be able to go into. It's just how they migrate and what means are there to be able to flee war or be able to go into a different country that will be felt welcomed. If there is any means there, usually there isn't.
And I think you posted something that said it's ironic that sometimes the people who are fleeing war-torn countries arrive in the safety of countries that are supplying arms, that are supporting the very war that they're fleeing from.
Yeah. I was in Uganda and I was trying to figure out the best route to go and continue the journey. And as this team, we were trying to work out where to go, because the route I was supposed to go into initially was to go into DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, but that war there stopped me from going there. And then looking up north, I can see the war that's going on in Sudan, and there was no way of being able to cross that and be able to continue the journey through Sudan. And then to the right of me, or East Africa, in northern Ethiopia, there's another war that's going on, and that's been going on for 2 years. And that is like, what's going on? Like, how can you have all these wars happening at the same time and no one is talking about them? And these 3 wars together make up the biggest displacement in the world today. We've got Sudan, people from Sudan are fleeing to neighboring countries, Chad, they're fleeing to South Sudan, Uganda, they're fleeing to Ethiopia, they're going straight into another war that's happening, and then into Kenya as well. And these are all the countries which I was going through. And then fleeing into Egypt as well. So I'm seeing kind of like firsthand, like people migration happening, and all these countries being affected as well. But while I was trying to get to Europe, and it's the European countries, including the Arab countries, which are actually playing the are the ones who playing the role of the wars continuing within its countries, well as those wars could have probably have stopped very quickly.
Is this through arms sales? Is this
Through arms sales, yeah. And I kind of have to caveat it by saying, it's they could be the ones who are selling the arms to these countries, because it's not publicized to be saying that they are the ones who are selling it. But when the Sudan war happened and when it started, it was everybody said in the news that, you know what, it's going to stop within 2 months. Give it 2 months, 3 months, maximum, it's done. But we are now, 2 years on, it's still going. And it's not because they've got a limitless amount of arms so they can keep fighting. It's because there's ways of those arms coming into the country. In Sudan, for example, the war is happening between the two generals who are in conflict, try to gain power over each other, gain power over the country. And those two generals on opposing sides, they're being fed arms from the outside influences, Europe, America, because the other ones getting arms from the Arab nations and the likes of Russia. And so the war can continue. One person has to come out on top.
Right, and so people are profiting from this, basically.
Yes, yeah. There's reasons why they will be profiting from it. The likes of Sudan has great minerals that they would be able to profit from. So that's why it's lasting for this long.
Like you said, it's something we often don't really hear much from in the global north. I'm not very educated in those areas of Africa and what's going on there. But to hear you say it's the biggest displacement of people globally in that region is insane.
Yeah.
I suppose it's important to note that the people who are displaced don't willingly want to leave their home.
No.
No one ever does.
No one ever does. And why would you? Like, if your home is good and you've got everything that you need to be there, why would you leave? Unless, you're looking for better opportunities. And then that's when you do leave, because obviously us that live in the global north, we can be able to migrate and go south or go somewhere else because we are looking for better opportunities. But the people who are living in small communities, especially like people that live in villages and stuff like that, they tend to live their whole life in that village. So they have no reason to be leaving. They've got everything they need there. Africa's historically, the story that's been told about Africa is that we don't have enough. So we are always trying to go somewhere else to find that. And I'm saying enough by, food to eat. We don't have enough resources. We are lesser than the global north. But usually we find that those people that actually are happy with what they have and where they are, and they don't need to go anywhere. So they wouldn't want to leave for that reason, but because they've been forced to leave and they have to find somewhere to go, and part of that somewhere to go is the so-called promised land, which is within the global north, i.e. Europe, the UK, and sometimes we move because there's a reason to go to those countries, because you move because, for example, you have a relative there, a friend, and you go there specifically to be with that relative, And it makes migration a lot more easier to go to a country where you know somebody's there. So you staying with the family, you know, that's what people want to be like, to be around, to be in the comfort of a loved one, not to just go somewhere where they don't know and they have to learn a complete new language, be a complete new environment. Everything changes when you migrate and go to a new country, new environment. And it's uncomfortable to be there. And that's why people don't just want to just leave and go somewhere new.
I'm going to pause our story there for the moment and actually backtrack and talk about your kind of journey that led up to Uganda. In your first country, South Africa as well, I think that's when I think you experienced your first real experience of racism. This is coming into contact with some of the farmers.
Yeah.
What happened there? I think I read that you were threatened with your life at one point.
Yeah, we had a challenge of when our car got stuck in sand, because we had decided to take a route that goes through some local farms, and that area is occupied by white farmers, so don't really have black people there, but there is black people, but the area is basically for white farmers. And when we got stuck in the sand, our vehicle, we need to get it out, and we were trying to find people that could help us and assist us to get the car out. And I went on ahead so I can walk and try to find somebody to help us, while as my driver, Toma, he stayed in the car. In the place, there was you could get the car like every 25 minutes, let's say, you can come past, and those cars were going past us, and they had somebody who luckily stopped and came and helped us get the car out. When he was helping us, these other people that came and started questioning us why we were there and what we were doing in that place, and they said, "Are you lost?" So no, we're not lost. This is part of our route, and this is what I'm doing. I'm running through South Africa and I'm going up north. So there's no way I'm lost. We know the route we're taking. So we got out and we carried on. And during that evening, because by the time we took the car out, the sun was setting, and I have to continue my run to finish it off. I had previously met a local farmer, who's a black gentleman, who was the only person that actually had a farm within that area, who's like a black person in that area. And while he had offered us accommodation to stay there in his farm, but I had to find where that farm was. He gave us directions, go here, and you find it. When you get close by, give me a call, we'll let you in. But it was difficult to get, to find it. And while we were going there, everybody had their eyes on us. At one point, there was some cars going past me and trying to kind of force me off the road. And they were like really coming so close to me. And I can tell by the energy of it, like it was not a positive energy. So eventually we found the place where we're going to stay. We stayed there at night, and then in the morning, actually let's keep at that, find accommodation. The people that were the farmer and his sisters that were staying there, they really embraced us. They gave us the best experience of somebody that welcomes us. They cooked us food, looked after us, and we didn't have a bed for us to stay, but they gave us an area for us to stay in. Slept in the car, and we came out that morning feeling really energized and really happy to have had such welcoming experience. So we went back to the start point, continued to go on, and that's when we had the farmers come at us. They came in the car stopped us in our tracks, and in a very hostile way, they questioned us like, why were we there? Straight away, I was like, whoa, what's going on? I felt scared, but I didn't want to show that. So they were very, very hostile, very aggressive in their approach. And I can see that they didn't want us there. And they told us straight away, it's like, look, guys, you need to get out of here quickly. Otherwise, something, could happen.
Could they see that you were running?
They saw that I was running.
With a vehicle nearby?
Yes, yeah. I had the vehicle behind and I was running ahead. So the vehicle was to wait for me to go quite a distance and then follow me behind.
Because it's quite clear that you're not very threatening when you're just on a run.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm
with one of the driver.
With one of the driver in the car. And I'm not, dressed in any way that's threatening. I just have a t-shirt and shorts. So I'm quite, hands are open. There's nothing you can see that I have that's kind of hidden in a threatening way. But they went to the driver and they asked him questions and stuff. And then they came and cut me off. Once they left him behind and really cut me off. And they just started questioning me aggressively. And what's profound is that in this area is that you can see the segregation between the black and white people. The black people are there as a help. They're there to help the white people. And that's very evident. Having us there as not the help, I guess, as us just traveling through, sends a different message to them. But then it's like I was very adamant in my approach as well, like telling them directly that this is what I'm here to do and I'm going to do it regardless. So I'm going to get through this. And then
you put your life on the line.
Yeah.
Really? Considering the circumstances you're under.
Yeah.
For this journey.
Yeah.
Because it could have just been easy to jump in the car and be like, let's just skip this
skip this section. Yeah. I don't even know why, but I was like, I needed to show them that I'm here to do this regardless of what they say. And then they let go of the situation. But before letting go of that situation, the guy at the back, who was a black guy, and I don't know why this kind of stands out a lot to what he did. He signed, a sign of look, you need to get out of here quickly, otherwise we're gonna cut your throat. And that straight away just told me yo, we need to quickly get out of here. But then while we continued, we got the police that came, and that's because they called the police.
The farmers called the police on you?
The farmers called the police, and then the police came and stopped us and questioned why we were there and what we were doing. So I explained exactly, showed them exactly what we were doing, the route I'm taking, breaking down for him. It was just a single police officer. There was a black guy as well, who understood the journey and the purpose of it, and he was quite happy to assist us. And he really assisted us in the best way possible. Gave me all his details and said, mate, if anything comes up, give me a call and I'll be here straight away. He went back and just explained to the guys. But I think without him coming, I would have felt quite threatened, very anxious going through the rest of South Africa. I think he was a massive help, and he still follows the journey now.
There's a lot actually to unpack from that story, really. It's, I suppose, evidence that apartheid is still happening in some areas, rural areas of South Africa. And you passed through a region of this on a mission that was against all their against the values that they had. But then you had the warmth from one farmer who wanted to take you in and give you this love and respect. So you got this balance between like the worst of humanity, but the very best of humanity, all in one region and a space of a few days. Yeah. How does it feel now looking back at this, that's those circumstances, knowing that you do have hope in humanity and people were there to assist you and support you and believe in your journey, but there were also people who weren't.
Yeah.
And these are the people that are causing the problem which you're trying to alleviate.
Yeah. So I guess like in terms of talking about South Africa, it's quite it's a bit of an odd situation.
Very complex.
Yeah, it's quite complex because the farmers, when they broke down, the officers, the one that actually broke it down for us, is that he said that the white farmers are also scared for their life because they've been threatened by people who are trying to take the land back. And those people who are taking the land back are the ones who are original landowners, and those happen to be black people. So they feel scared. They feel threatened, and whenever like someone unknown comes in their area, they take it as a case of somebody who's trying to take over their land, and sometimes as a consequence, it tends to be that maybe a white farmer ends up losing their life. I don't know how often that happens, and how much that land gets taken away from there. But from what I got from what was happening right now is the farmer that actually invited us to live at his farm was a black person. He works to actually campaign against this in terms of like getting land back to the actual original landowners, and they have systems in place working with the government and campaigning and looking at the best ways to be able to support farmers, those who have to leave the farms, basically the white farmers, and those who are coming in to take over the farm, who would be the black people who are the landowners. And they have systems in place with the government to aid those two parties. And he's one of the founding people to come up with a strategy to support both parties. So seeing both sides, and the one side is extreme and another one is actually being helpful. It's quite telling. I don't know how to actually take it from my side. Yeah.
No, but thank you for actually clarifying that. It just kind of showed the very complex nature of the circumstances around how people are living in that part of the world. And although it doesn't make it right, it just kind of puts some context behind the behavior of those white farmers.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't in the right manner of how you should be approaching people who are just passing through the land. One of the things that you wanted to do to ensure that this journey lived on longer than just the passing through is set up what you call the legacy of hope. And it was something that you took from day one in Cape Town. You spoke in schools, talking to kids, educating them about your journey. It's also something that you continued to do on the road as you met people. So talk a bit about what that is and the experiences you had on the road when you're passing by people who you were able to educate about this journey and they could follow you along.
Yeah, the legacy of hope is something that we've come up with to try and leave a lasting legacy, so to say, as for the next generation. And that is providing better education in understanding our history, particularly migration. For example, in Africa, understanding a little bit more better, having a better understanding of how Africa is like beyond slavery and beyond colonization, and what other ways are there for the next generation to actually feel inspired. I did that in a few schools in Southern Africa, and I was growing up, but then it extended to go, onto outside of the schools, into like on the roads as I was continuing. So that was a real positive part of it. I wasn't able to go into schools or communities in every country based on the time frame that I had, and restrictions and language barriers and all these things came into play. But it kind of like evolved to be more online, more of inspiring the next generation online. So I plan to actually keep it going beyond, finishing the project of running from Cape Town to London. So now the focus is going to go back onto the legacy of hope.
Yeah, it's something that I think is a really positive thing that's come out of this, is that it's something that you can now take forward to go on a new journey after this is finished. And I saw at the end of your run, when you finished in London, how driven you were by the experiences you had to not celebrate the fact that this was the end of a journey, but the start of a new one for yourself.
Yeah.
And from some of the experiences, maybe let's talk about some of them now. We've talked about South Africa. You passed through Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania before making your way to Uganda, which we'll come to in a minute. Again, I've just breezed through these countries like they just happened overnight, but these took weeks and months to cross. Tell me about your experiences through those countries.
So those countries, part of the southern part of Africa and touching onto East Africa as well, I had some of the most incredible hospitality as I go through the countries. There were people who were welcoming me into their homes. There's an experience which I got, is that when I was in Botswana and I was running, there was a couple that just happened to see me running, and they came and approached me and my driver and said, "What's going on? Where's this guy running on the road?" Because they saw me when they were traveling to go in a different direction, and they came back and saw me again. It turned out that they were quite connected within Botswana, and they actually hosted me at their house, cooked us dinner, and had a really good welcome into Gaborone, the capital city of Botswana. And they also were able to get me into the media in Botswana. So they helped me as much as they could. So that kind of like gave me an insight into how hospitable people were in the country and how welcoming they are, even though they just met me as a stranger.
So continuing your journey, you arrived in Uganda. So you were born in Uganda, and you had made sure that this was part of your route so you could connect with family. And it would be a really inspiring checkpoint in your journey. But for various reasons, it came with many struggles. This part of your journey that was meant to be a celebration actually had its own problems. Talk us through what was going on while you were in Uganda, or even getting into Uganda.
Initially, before I got into Uganda, I had dealt with torrential rain in Tanzania, having to cross national parks which are full of wildlife, and food poisoning. So already my body was already exhausted before entering Uganda, and then going to the border between Tanzania and Uganda, I was tired, and we were trying to get there before, in time before Christmas. Alice was coming to join me, and then I also have the opportunity to see my family as well. But the border crossing, it was the most challenging out of all the countries I had been through previously.
Why is that?
I think...
'Cause you're Ugandan born.
Yeah.
But you didn't have the passport.
Yeah.
You were on a British passport.
I was using a British passport, and also part of it is because we also had vehicle that's not a Ugandan vehicle. So it's from Zimbabwe. And generally, that crossing is quite tricky and it makes things a bit more difficult. But when they see somebody who holds a Ugandan, holds a passport that's not Ugandan, they take a different approach to that, which is kind of like negative, obviously. Like, it's not like, okay, we celebrate you for coming back into Uganda, so you have an easy passage through. It's taken a bit more of like, well, you decided to leave the country. You decided to give up your nationality, so we're going to make it harder for you to enter the country again. Whereas other people who basically may have their own nationality enter Uganda, they will have an easier time to cross. So the time that it took us crossing the border, it was 5 hours from when I got to the border. Mind you, I had just run 50 kilometers to get to that border, and then an extra 5 hours there of waiting and going back and forth, go here, go there, car issues, and you kind of like need to pass some money, to somebody to try and make the journey the passage a bit more smoother. And it just became really difficult. By the time we finished the whole thing, it was almost midnight. And then we have to find accommodation to go to go be able to sleep and wake up or not even just find accommodation, and then get food as well, shower. So by the time you go to bed and sleep, it's I think it was around 1 a.m, having to wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to start the run again. Yeah.
But you eventually made it to Kampala. Where you based yourself, I suppose, to work out your next steps.
Yeah.
You continued your running, albeit on a shorter amount, just running around town.
Yeah. For
a few days, sorting out logistics, paperwork for the car. You attempted to go via Kenya, but you turned around.
Yeah. In order to get into Ethiopia with the vehicle, you have to pay the value of the car to be able to enter the country, and potentially when they allow you into the country, they could give you it's kind of like a deposit. They will probably give the money back when you exit, knowingly that you've exited with the car, but there was no promise that you get that back. Additionally, there's fees for entering, but because also there was a war in northern Ethiopia, it kind of made a decision to go back. Much more easier.
So you ran into Kenya, attempted to go to Ethiopia. It was a no-go for you. You turned around and then decided to go through South Sudan.
Yeah.
Was the plan at the time to get always to the border of Sudan and then skip that country?
No.
Were you?
Sorry. Yeah, the border of Sudan.
Border of Sudan.
Of Sudan, yes.
There was no way to pass through Sudan safely. This is a war-torn country.
Yeah.
People go in and don't come out.
Yeah.
So that was always going to be a case of you just couldn't cross that area of land.
Yeah. We looked at various options, whether it was a possibility, because Sudan is huge. And if there was any way of being able to like go through a more remote area, but that would pose a lot of other issues. So it meant that there was no way of actually going there and basically skip Sudan and go up to Egypt.
It was in South Sudan that your run streak was stopped, not by choice. You disappeared.
Yeah.
It's probably a way of saying it from the perspective of people back at home.
Yeah.
And Alice, your partner, didn't know where you were.
Yeah.
She had a tracker on you, which had stopped. and you were no longer in day-to-day contact with her. From her perspective, she didn't know where you were. And I think it took maybe 2 weeks nearly before she discovered anything about your location and what was happening to you.
Yeah. It was more than 2 weeks before she knew what had happened. I think it was like 318, day 318, when we approached a checkpoint. Like, mind you, through South Sudan, you approach various checkpoints throughout the day, and this checkpoint was manned by a lot more people. And me and Molundo, who was the driver by this point, he was following behind me, and I had been told to go on by the people manning the checkpoint. I can keep going, but then they stopped him and asked him some questions. So I expected, like, right, it's gonna take a few minutes, and then he's gonna come and come and join me again. So I kept running, and we've been going through these checkpoints, and we know the deal, what to do and how to get around them. But then it wasn't coming. I'm like, it's gone, 10 minutes now? It's not coming. 20 minutes. What's going on? It's not coming. 30 minutes. And I'm like, well, what's happening? So I'm like continuously looking backwards, and I'm trying to see when it's coming. I say to myself, just run and get to 10 kilometers for that day, because that was the minimum I was running. Just get to the 10-kilometer marker, and then maybe get somebody who's going back, like on a border, which is a motorcycle, and then you can drive me back. Just before I was getting to that 10-kilometer point, the car, Molundo, came to meet me. And I was like, okay, cool, that's fine, he's coming. But then when I look closer, I see 2 other people in the car. And our policy was more like, don't take anyone. So I knew straight away, it's like, well, okay, this is not an everyday person that's in the car. They weren't in uniform. So when they came, they asked us, they told me, like, we need to go back to the checkpoint for questioning. Go back to the checkpoint. They got us into a little office where was all these other people, officers, soldiers, all around the table, and they started questioning us. And from that questioning, we explained why we were there, gave them all the details. However, they couldn't allow us to actually show them physical stuff. So any physical material that we had, we weren't able to show it to them. So on the phone, we weren't able to show them, like,
were you talking about showing them your social media accounts?
Yeah.
To kind of prove that you were this kind of person who was on a journey, and the world was watching you.
Yeah, so needed to show them some kind of proof of why I was there and what I was doing. In addition, that we entered the country legally, because at one point they were saying that we entered the country illegally, and we didn't have visas, so we just entered, not via the border. And so we had to prove that.
You had all the documentation with you, right?
Had all the documentation, had everything with us. But they didn't want to, for us to show it to them. They were going through the phone by themselves, so they literally forced me to give my PIN to them for the phone. Gave it to them so they can be able to see. They could basically just go through the phone, look for whatever they want to look for. And they didn't like that I had a British passport. And of course, having a British passport, why I decided to travel with a British passport, actually, it makes it easier to travel through Africa as opposed to me traveling with the Ugandan passport.
Which sounds crazy for anyone who doesn't really know about the borders within Africa. I think many people assume because you are African born that you can freely travel through the continent. That's definitely not the case.
No, it's very difficult to cross borders. It's a little bit more easier regionally, like let's say East Africa, the countries that are within those borders. You can enter other countries a bit more easily. But if you want to go beyond that, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to actually be able to get a visa to allow you to enter the country.
Yeah. Palumi mentioned this on her journey when she drove from London to Lagos. And this is the first time I really discovered the struggles that an African person has traveling through certain areas of Africa, because there are just tensions between certain countries, because they just don't like to have people outside of this, like you said, like a region. They've got a nice special relationship, but to another area of the continent, they don't.
They don't, no.
And they treat you like a foreigner.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Probably like way worse than a European person getting into their country. The European will be treated with a lot more respect. They'll be welcomed a lot better. But versus me going into a different country within Africa, I would be like met with a bit of hostility. And like I mentioned, even me just entering my own country with a British passport, they didn't like that so much. So you kind of like go in and you meet with these two things, like as a Ugandan, a former Ugandan entering Uganda with a British passport. It's not easy. And then as me, if I go into a different country within Africa with a Ugandan passport, it's also not easy. So it's like, at what point do you win? So that's why we are doing a lot of campaign to try and open up the borders within Africa. So it's much more smoother for Africans to travel within Africa borderless.
Yeah. So what happened when they saw your British passport and weren't happy with that?
Yeah, they weren't happy with it because now they are looking at me differently. They're looking at me like, why is this Ugandan who says he's Ugandan have a British passport? So then they took a much more different approach. So now instead of questioning both me and Mulundo, it's now the questioning is onto me solely. And now it comes from being questioned to more of an interrogation. Now I've been told you have to stand continuously for a few hours while you're being questioned. So I was questioned for a really long time, a few hours. One person will question me, and then they leave without saying anything, and another group of people come in and they do go through the same process again, and they leave, another group of people come in, and it continued on for quite some time until eventually they came to a decision and say, and they didn't tell us what they were going to do. So then some soldiers came and they told us, to go to the car. And we thought that, okay, we're going to the car again to be searched, because they were already searching the car a few times. But they told us to get into the back of the car, not the boot, but just to sit in the back of the back seats of the car. And they at the front, one of the soldier drives, another soldiers watching us.
This was your own car?
With our own car.
They had hijacked?
Yeah, they had taken, mind you, they have, big guns. So we don't do anything out of the ordinary. So we just had to comply the best way possible.
At this point, did you still feel like you were going to get off with your day within a few hours? So this would just, they'd just say, okay, off you go now. At what point did you realize that was not going to happen?
Yeah, because they didn't tell us anything. And one of the guys just said, so do you have any questions? And we were like, okay, so where are you taking us? And that's why we asked them. And then he didn't reply to that question. And I was like, that's odd. And then we ended up going to this location, and into that location, they drove into a house, what appears to be like a house. And when we went there, it's like, okay, get out, get into this office, into this house, with them following us behind, making sure we don't do any sudden moves. Get into the house, and we meet this guy who is the head of the soldiers, because that's the point where they all get deployed to go to their locations. And they take us there, and then we have to explain again what we are doing. We get questioned again why we're doing there. And then he comes to a conclusion, and he says, okay, now you are under arrest. He said, you are under arrest for taking pictures or photos and videos within the country without permission from the Ministry of Sports and Ministry of Media. Of course, we had already researched all of these things, and we found that, you don't need to have those paperwork. And because we didn't have the paperwork, that's what they say. We didn't have that paperwork to show them, and we weren't allowed and approved. There was no approval, so we are under arrest. Got arrested. They had already taken everything off us. They, like, the watch, the wristbands, and like anything that we had that's more that looked an accessory. Everything was taken off us. The money, everything.
Just you and some basic clothes.
Just the clothes I was running in.
Were you offered a phone call?
No. That was quite ridiculous to actually even ask us that question. Then they took us into a little kind of like basement room that had no proper light in, and there was a small window to the corner of the room, and there was nothing within the room, just more of an empty room, and they locked us in there.
It's just the two of you in that room together?
Just at the initial lock-in, just me and Molundo.
That was the first time I think you'd realise what was happening to you, and the first time you could openly talk to your driver about the situation that you'd found yourself in. Yeah. What was going through your mind, and what conversations did you have at that moment about what you thought you could do in that moment when everything's taken away from you and you have no way of contacting any external help at all?
Yeah. I was like to myself, what is going on? And like questioning everything, like, did we do something wrong? Did we kind of like not follow the right procedures? But we know like we kind of like followed the procedures in the best way possible. And speaking with Molondo, he was like, you know what, it's okay. He's like, he's trying to reassure me, you know what I mean? And he says that, you know what, we were gonna get out, before sunset. They will let us out, they will just be able to come, and then after some discussions we will be let free. And they said, like, the best will be kept is one day, and then we'll go. So I was kind of like hanging on to that hope for that time, that period I was there, that it's not going to be a long time there.
How long were you held in that location for?
So that location, I was held there for 2 weeks in that place. And in that place, I was able to have 1 meal a day. And it's the same meal. It's called posho or ugali. For any East Africans that know it, it's just white starch, basically, and beans. That's what you have. Fortunately, is because we had some money, the guy allowed us to be able to use some of that money to purchase any extra food. So either the head of the soldiers, either he would go out and buy us some food that we request, or we would send somebody. So I think that was one of the fortunate things. So in the evening, at night, we would get some extra food.
Was this the place where you had to sleep on the concrete floor?
Yes. So this is the place we slept on the floor.
No bedding?
No bedding.
For 2 weeks on a concrete floor?
Yeah. I mean, I think after some time, after a week, it started to feel, I think, a bit more remorse for us. So he gave us a mat to lay on. So we were able to, lay on a mat, but no covers, no nothing. And this place has a lot of mosquitoes. Every single day, we were bitten by hundreds of mosquitoes.
Was this just you and your driver in the same room together? Was there anyone else there?
There was another person. The first 2 nights, we were in the room as 4 people. So there was another person that was captive, and another person, who was there for 2 nights with us. We then found out that he was also a soldier that they had asked to stay there with us. I guess just so to know that nothing's gonna go wrong within the cell between me and the other guy. Or just to listen in, kind of like a conversation we may have. So that was kind of like the possibilities why he was there. But then, yeah, it's a very dark room once the light goes, the smallest light that we have. So everything is completely pitch black. So you can't see anything.
Meanwhile, back at home, anyone following on your Strava, which you were updating daily, would have seen that you hadn't ran for several days. Alice, I think, had given you a bit of time because she knew some reasons you went certain days where you had like limited signal.
Yeah.
And some of the, you were working out your own like challenges each day per day. But there became a time when she had to call for help. She was in contact with the Met Police.
Yeah.
Interpol got involved. She was in contact with them daily, and she was in contact with various forms of press who were very close to publishing your story of you going missing to try and raise awareness of it.
Yeah.
I think word got out to Alice where you were through someone who had shared a cell with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of like to bring it back, because we kind of like gone into the northern part of South Sudan where we were heading into. We anticipated that signal was going to be very limited, and sometimes communication wasn't going to be possible between me and Alice as easily as it was in the other places. And it would have been through the satellite phone, and sometimes for her to receive the messages would have been like, for example, if she has signal at the time. But so went for more than 2 weeks without communication, and she was trying to get hold of me. And mind you, actually, it was my birthday when I was in prison. So that is something we were looking forward to be able to have some kind of communication, have a phone call properly. So ended up spending my birthday in prison, just being shouted at by some soldier.
Did anyone know it was your birthday?
No. They didn't really care, to be honest. And we had been moved on. So I spent my birthday at the first place, and then we got moved on to a different prison. And that different prison was actually more like a prison with other inmates and cells. And so it looked like a prison and felt like a prison. And then from there, after we had kind of like spoke with other people there, found out why they were there as well on very, very trivial things, we established some kind of like relationship and friendship with some of the people. And some of them we found out that were due to leave. And they've been told they're going to be leaving very soon. So we gave them information of our story, why we were there, and they felt that it was actually, unjust of why we got arrested. One of the guy who was, actually it was 3 people were supposed to leave at the same time. I told them that this is my social media page. Got him to remember my social media page and Alice as well. And I told them that, look, that this is my partner. Once you get out, please, can you contact her and just let her know that I'm here being held and there's no way I can be able to contact you. So please, just all I wanted her for him just to pass on the information, and so that she knows where I am, because I had no idea how long we were going to be in the prison. So luckily enough, those guys were released, those 3 people, and all of them we give them information. But we didn't know whether they actually are going to be released, because you don't know when they say you're going to be released or whether you're going to be taken to somewhere else. Fortunately, they got released and were deported back to their countries where they came from. And that's when they passed on the information to Alice.
This was vital information in the search for you, because unbeknownst to you, she was having conversations with police, with Interpol, with the press, and I think as soon as she got the location of where you were, conversations were even happening in Parliament. She had connections with MPs, where they could use their connections to talk with embassies nearby and say, look, the international press want to publish a story about you being locked up in jail against your own human rights. And that was very close to you going to press. But possibly because of that pressure, people woke up to the fact that this would be a very negative story on the country as a whole.
Yeah.
And so after 3 weeks in a South Sudan jail, you were eventually released.
Yeah.
Given back all your belongings, all your money, and given freedom. What was going through your mind in those moments when you first heard that?
Yeah. So not knowing what was happening, back here and what they were doing, and the mission Alice was on, because she had to literally just go full force with everybody and say, like, this is what we're doing. All the contacts that she had got in touch with, even human rights teams were involved, the British Embassy, who were speaking with them. So then these guys basically, once they've got knowledge of this, they in a way kind of like just spat us out. It was like, hey, you guys, because they called us, it was a Sunday, and they don't let anyone out on a Sunday. And they called us, and I was thinking that they're just getting us to go to explain something to them, for example. And they take us to this guy. He is one of the heads of the prison that we're in. He just specifically came in for that reason, to let us out. He tells us that we're being released. But what they didn't tell us is that they needed us to publicly apologize for what we were doing and not having approval
from the Ministry of Sport.
Yes.
Which was not needed in the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
So then we had to wait for hours before we can be able to go and do that. And that was in a completely different location. So then we've been taken around the city to go and write a formal apology, to apologize for taking photos in the country.
So you were locked up illegally for 3 weeks in inhumane conditions in a dark basement for 2 weeks with just one meal a day, which is the same food, basic food, with no real access to the outdoors, sleeping on a concrete floor. And then you come out of this under very weird circumstances, knowing that you've just had your journey derailed by 3 weeks. You've been had an enforced break. You've not been able to run. Trying to process an experience that is so profound that I bet it's still kind of something you're processing now today. No one wants to be locked up, certainly against their own will. What did you feel about your journey at that point? And, did you want to continue it? Was there an idea to pause it? Did you think about stopping it completely?
So to say, the people or the prisoners that I met in the prison, those were some of the most wonderful people that I met on my journey. Super, super welcoming. They were all, not all of us, most of us were in the same position. So we were all supporting each other in the best way possible. And that's why one of the guys was able to pass on that information to Alice. And because I had lived the experience of a migrant person going into a country and ending up in that position and really understanding that, because there were people who had come, like one guy was from Nigeria, other guys were from Somalia, from Uganda, like those neighboring countries, like they ended up in that position. And you really get to see and say, whoa, this is what happens to some people who migrate to a new country and find themselves in this position without any contact to their loved ones. And their loved ones will never know what happened to them, some of them, until they're released. So I came up with, when I came out, I had a bit more renewed energy to continue the journey for these guys and to be able to show them that we can, complete this. I'm going to complete this for you guys. They knew the journey and they were very supportive. Some people were helping me beyond what they would do. And if anyone found out that they were helping me, they would get in more trouble. So yeah, that's why I was like, I need to finish this for these guys.
How did you feel at this part of your story, which we've dedicated quite a bit of time with, and it is kind of one of the headlines, certainly of your journey through Africa. And one of the things that you really wanted to do in your journey across Africa was to paint it in a really positive light.
Yeah.
But how did you feel that this has caused a bit of a stain on that journey? You've explained to a lot of extent the circumstances of possibly why you were imprisoned, because you're an Ugandan on a British passport, right? And so there was very specific circumstances that perhaps you just being that person was the reason why they wanted to focus on you. It wasn't just random. There was something behind that, and it feeds into the bigger picture of migration as well through other countries. Well, what are your thoughts generally about this part of your journey that we're focused on?
To me, I think that looking back, right, it's like I was trying to find so many different avenues of like getting around South Sudan specifically, because I kind of like was like, you know what, don't go into South Sudan. There's no point going there. But the journey led there. So I think I was always supposed to go there. The journey was leading me to go and discover that part of migration and to be able to tell it and bring it to the outside world, because most people will never know what happens to some people that actually do migrate and they disappear without a trace. So yeah, I think I was supposed to be there. in the worst way possible, but it brings a bit more light to the journey and gives it more depth.
There was something about what you've experienced on this route which gives you a much more deeper purpose in the stories that you want to tell going forward in life. And you were never to know what these stories were when you set off. One of them has been the fact that you were illegally locked up for 3 weeks. Another happens to be the journey that you took through Europe, which initially you weren't due to go through Greece. You were meant to go through Spain, but because of changes in your route, and you obviously had to skip Sudan, and then you crossed Egypt. But then after Egypt, you got a ferry across to begin the second big leg of your journey, because crossing one continent was not enough. You had to cross the other.
Yeah.
And you started that journey in Greece. And we'll come and talk about this, but the circumstances around how you traveled through those countries, initially through Europe, was a lot different than your journey through Africa.
Yeah.
But there was something so poetic about you starting that last leg of your journey through Europe in Greece, because this is a very common route for asylum seekers when they are looking to find safety in countries in Europe. I talked with Freya in one of our podcast episodes where she explains that Greece is where a lot of people start that journey, and then they migrate through the countries. Very few of them actually end up in the UK. Actually, it's other countries like Germany and France and Austria that they end up in. But here you were actually going on the same journey that so many migrants do. Whilst you're telling this history of human migration, you were also doing the very current migration route that was happening.
Yeah. So it started in Athens in Greece, at the port, which is a very significant part of how people, asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants, they enter from. And in recent years, there's been more people like from fleeing war, for example, like Syria, Iran, Iraq, all these places, and that is an entry point for them. And then those people would go on. Either some would stay in Greece or continue the journey to go up north, to settle in other countries which are safe, or basically they're just going to their relatives who live in the specific countries. So the route I'm following now in Europe is basically following that exact kind of like route. And as I go up north, everybody's looking at me and saying like, okay, this is potentially an immigrant or a refugee. And that became more and more evident as I moved up.
Because you were on your own for some stretches of this. And instead of having a support vehicle and a driver carrying all your stuff, you took it on yourself to carry everything you needed.
Yeah.
And this was a solo journey for some of the countries, not all, or was it for most of them?
Pretty much most of them, yes. Because I had people come in and out just to support me for like a day or two. But most of it was pretty much solo. And I was carrying all my belongings.
So how did that change how you passed through land? Because now you weren't running and you didn't have the support. You were completely on your own. You had a lot of time to yourself. Now you were no longer in Africa. So being an African-born person, you are now in a majority white Europe.
Yeah.
Standing out as looking different.
Yes, looking different. So I decided to do this part solo because I felt I needed to have the time to myself to unpack so much of what had happened in Africa. And part of it also was funds. I didn't have enough funds to have a driver and a car and stuff. So that's another reason. Greece was okay as I moved through the country. It was fine, and I traveled through. I didn't have anything that stand out to me, like being looked at oddly or funny. Mind you, I'm carrying quite a big backpack with me that has everything that I need to be able to support quite a long journey. I actually, before leaving Greece, I went and visited a refugee camp and a charity that supports refugees. I didn't get into the refugee camp, but the charity, which is called Second Tree, were able to host me and give me a lot more insight on what refugees encounter when they get into the country, and specifically Greece as is the main entry point. What they do, the issues they face, and having to seek asylum within the country, and if they don't seek asylum, and how they carry on, and what they support them with, because they support them with language skills, tools for what they need within the country, and support, which is extremely important to understand the law of the country and what they could encounter. And another part was they helped a young gentleman who had lost his wife because they attempted to cross the border in northern Macedonia. And when they tried to attempt to cross that border, they got stopped by the police, and the police shot and killed his wife. So this charity was helping with the lawsuit of that police officer, and being able to take and bring new policy into place, into being able to hold accountable a police officer when they shoot and kill a person who crosses the border illegally, when they could have just sent them back to the country they're coming from. So that I got a better understanding of all of this. And me continuing into other countries, traveling solo, I started to stand out more and more as I continued to go up north. The Balkan countries don't really get to see a black person that often. And when they do, it's normally in the capital cities, not in the countrysides, the farms, and those really remote places. So I really stood out going through these places.
You were still on your own,
and I was still on my own
in rural areas.
Yeah.
Did you feel unsafe?
I felt unsafe in some areas, but it's also feeling unsafe in terms of like, I could fall and sleep and nobody would know, that I got injury. So I had to be extra careful, like in terms of feeling unsafe, I need to make sure that if I slept outside and camped, that I'm not trying to camp where it's a bit dangerous. Maybe there's, wildlife, or, there's snakes, which I was able to see while I was going. I was in Albania and I felt okay. I felt fine, going through Albania. But as I crossed into the other countries, the likes of Bosnia and Croatia, I started to feel a lot more hostility and more unsafe. Then I was getting stopped by the police more often. I was getting stopped by the police in Albania and Montenegro, but not as much and not as unfriendly. So it became to a point where I was being stopped by the police every single day, at least 3 times a day on average. And that was very difficult for that to happen. Yeah.
Especially considering, what happened in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
They must have brought up so much of that trauma. And now you're on your own in a foreign country. not sure how they're going to treat someone who looks like yourself. How did you get through that? Was it just a case of just being patient, being calm, just having hope?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned on this journey like this is, one, you have to be hopeful in everything, on all encounters that you have. Just be hopeful, because you get out of the situation and tomorrow is going to be a better day. So I was having a lot of hope that, you know what, tomorrow is going to be better than today. It brought up a lot of issues that happened in Africa, being arrested. And in Egypt, I had to have a police with me 24/7 all the time. Even just to go to a shop, police would be following me. That was also felt like I got out of prison, but I wasn't free in Egypt.
Why did you have to have police escort?
They are quite afraid for something to happen to a foreigner. So they would, at the very least, have someone there from authority, so they know what's going on, and possibly also not to go off grid from what we say that we are going to do, because we had to submit permissions and giving them the exact route, where we're going to stay, a breakdown of when we're going to be specific places, like per day. And I suppose that if we were delayed in any way, we needed to let them know that we are delayed. So having that presence of a police officer with us all the time, it felt like, okay, I've got a prison, but I'm still not free to do what I need to do. And carrying on into Europe and constantly being stopped by police officers asking me for my documents all the time, it felt like I didn't belong, like I really didn't belong there, and I wasn't wanted there.
I suppose your journey through Europe came alive kind of passing into Slovenia and the countries onwards, where it seemed like the tide turned in how you were treated. And this snowball effect came, I suppose, perhaps from Austria and Germany specifically, of just this goodwill of making sure that your journey through the land was made as good as possible by the warmth and welcoming from the people that you met along the way.
Yeah, and I think also, like, it's partly also to do, Alice, what she did. She put out a call out for support from people, and yeah, she has done a massive amount of work in the background. Now, after I crossed the border from Croatia and into Slovenia, things became a bit more smoother. The border crossings weren't as difficult. And then also the borders disappeared. So then I was like, oh, so now there's no more borders to cross, apart from just imaginary lines.
That's a very interesting way of putting it, actually, yeah. Because they are just imaginary lines anyway.
Yes, exactly.
That humanity, man, is kind of likes to enforce in certain areas of the world. But I can relate to my journey through Europe this summer, where I didn't even notice that I'd crossed the country until I'd noticed that maybe the road signs had changed, or I saw a flag flying. I was like, oh, that's the flag of Austria. I'm in Austria now. I didn't realise.
Yeah, exactly.
You just don't realise you've crossed countries because the road just continues, and there might be a sign saying welcome to Switzerland or Austria, whatever. But there might not be, and you'll just effortlessly, and people who live in that area and work in different countries and travel freely with no border crossings at all.
Very freely. It's a massive contrast compared to Africa, crossing borders in Africa by land. And that's quite very telling in how, the two continents operate, One, they have freedom of movement, and the other, movement is completely restricted. But yeah, that helped in terms of like making the journey smoother. And I can see how people get to be able to freely just move around as they want and say, okay, I'm going to this country today, and not have to stress in any way. Whereas I come from very stressful border crossings, and now like the relief has come on me. And then people were able to come forward, and because I guess also because they also feel like they don't have the pressure of having to cross borders where they have to be checked as well. But now like I got support in Austria. I got support actually from Slovenia. I had a young gentleman who came, who's been following me on Strava. He offered to support me, Mattia, offered to support me by driving, and then I don't have to carry a bag. And then he drove on to go to as far as possible towards the border of Austria. They gave me as much information as possible, and it's felt so much more nicer and welcoming. And when I crossed into Austria, and this is where I felt I was going to have the biggest challenge, because I was crossing through the Austrian Alps during winter time.
Yeah.
And people just came to support, and out of the blue, I'm like, I've got somebody coming and supporting me. I got Josh, he came with his kids. So they took a full weekend to come and support me. So they were crewing me with his kids. Sometimes
these were strangers who were just giving up their time for you.
Yeah, just completely giving completely out of the blue.
Amazing.
And he had friends as well.
Geraldine McFall, who I had on this podcast, did a journey when she walked from Glasgow to Rome. She called it kind-napping. People kind-napped you with kindness.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. Kind-napping. Yeah.
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 And it just makes that journey, because you're doing such a physical feat on your own, it just helps fill you with hope and optimism. In humanity. These little acts of kindness. It doesn't take much. Someone offers you some food, it can just make your day.
Absolutely, 100%. And they went beyond just offering me food. It's like offering me somewhere to stay, sleep. And then in the morning, just putting out this wonderful breakfast for me and saying like, look, we've made breakfast for you. And also you have a really warm shower or bath or anything like that. We had Johannes, who's in Austria. He's a friend of Josh who had his kids. He just said, look, I'm willing to support you. I've been following your journey on Instagram, and he welcomed me into his house and met his kids and family. And he gave me the best Austrian breakfast I've ever had. And I'm such a big fan of Austrian breakfast now because of that. It's one of the best breakfasts you can have. And I felt so welcomed. I felt so understood as well, because people can resonate with the journey. And then we kept going on, moving up, and we then built up this like small communities within each country. Had like a social, a WhatsApp group, and everybody's just chipping in and say, okay, if you're going here, so we know this person can be able to host you. And then if you're going to go for these places, this person can also host you. And it just became this whole ripple effect of like people that know people that know people, and they just keep on supporting and helping.
It's very beautiful that was kind of, and very fitting that was kind of your ending to your epic journey, that you were able to finish with such positivity and love and support from community. What does this say about what the key themes of what your journey was all about from the very beginning, and how it's made you feel now when you've finished with on such a high?
Yeah, I mean, this journey was always about humanity and connection, and showing that we all come from the same place. So there's no difference between us, apart from, features and the color of our skin, but we are all human. I had said previously that Mother Nature doesn't care who we are or what we look like. We are all human, so Mother Nature just sees you as that, and that plays a massive part in like the community coming together to support each other. That everybody can resonate with the story.
One of the things about one of the unfortunate side effects of passing through Europe, even though you had fluid borders, was the unfortunate aspect of having a Schengen visa. This is what's come about as UK's decision to leave the EU. And so we can no longer just freely move around Europe limitlessly. We are now refined to a certain time limits that we can spend in Europe, which you had. And there were certain countries where you came out of Europe and then back into Europe when your Schengen visa started again. But that was a very pressing kind of time limit that that you knew you had to exit Europe and cross the border from Calais to Dover. How tight was it getting you back to the UK?
It was quite tight because when we looked at re-entering Europe through Croatia, I was 9 days behind schedule. So by the time I was going to reach Calais, I would have been 9 days out over my visa. So I needed to ensure that I crawled that time back. So that meant doing ultras and having minimal rest days. So what we did is, specifically me and Ben, who's doing the route planning for Europe, because Ben came on at the Europe journey, is that I told him that trying to crawl back this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have like at least 1 day a week of rest. And then also that I needed to come towards the German side after the Alps, is I'm going to fully add up the mileage. So I'm going to be doing more ultras rather than marathons or less than marathons. So that was him to figure out how that's going to work and how he's going to plan the route and break it down per distance so I can be able to finish from town to town, but maximizing the distance as possible. And that meant that extra time on feet, extra pushing, and I guess as a consequence, it resulted to partly my getting the injury.
Which we started the conversation with, but it's remarkable that you lasted so long without any serious injury. Arriving on UK soil after disappearing for over 500 days, and suddenly seeing all the kind of things that signify home for you, and having the familiarity within supermarkets and the British language, the English tongue. Must have felt amazing.
Yeah.
Did it feel weird returning to a place that is your home, seeing the sites that have just been there the whole time, that were places that you could remember? And then suddenly also your community joined you, and you were surrounded by faces that you hadn't seen in real life for a year and a half.
Yeah, it felt weird and surreal. Just being able to, one, understand people as they talk on the road, as they're walking past me. And as you say, shops that I recognize, I can be able to say, okay, you know what, instead of, I can just go into this shop. I know exactly what I can pick out from the shop and not have to go into the shop and spend a lot of time looking around. But then, I had the guys meet me in Dover, to support me. So by this point, I have a crew vehicle, and what an incredible bunch of people and community that we have to come together and just be able to support somebody for a greater cause. Because by then it would have been super difficult for me to even make it to London on time and to the set schedule that we planned. So having the community and people I recognize, the faces I know, brought me so much joy, happiness, and people just coming and say, hey, don't worry about this. I'm going to help you to get through here. So the last day, starting from Greenwich, and this is actually the point where the London Marathon starts as well, which is really cool. We had to do 21 kilometers to finish, just walking, because I could not be able to run at all. I went there and I see this group of people that come to walk with me and celebrate the finish, which has taken such a long time. It just felt really surreal, and the moment was filled with so much joy and happiness. And approaching Downing Street, I saw another bigger group of the community who were just there waiting for me to just celebrate, and then continue to Hammersmith together.
Well, just holding there at Downing Street, that's where you'd finished your Running for Justice campaign in 3 separate cycles, and here you were at the end of your 4th cycle, finishing at the very same place that you'd finished, this time with a huge community of people around you. But also the journey that you'd been on was huge. And then suddenly, this was it. This was like your finish point.
Yeah.
You'd arrived in London. This was Downing Street. This was the end of that journey from Cape Town to London. What was going through your head then?
I'd finished at Downing Street for 2 consecutive years, and then the last year before going off to Cape Town, I had reversed it the other way around to start from Downing Street and then finish at Hammersmith as a send-off. But getting to Downing Street, it just felt so powerful. I had decided not to finish at Downing Street for reasons that I no longer feel like want to give the power of me finishing a journey like this to Downing Street because of what I have learned going through Africa. And that meant that if I have to go a little bit extra to finish in Hammersmith, where I know the finishing point played a significant role in the development of the Black and brown culture in London, that represented a lot as well, because Hammersmith Studios, where we finished, played a real significant role in Black and brown culture in London.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it has. Yeah. A lot of artists had performed there, had been through there, and had called it a hub for their music and other things. So that was a significant part for me. One is taking away the power from the rule makers, and then having that point of finishing for where we celebrate Black culture.
And your mom met you there. She hadn't seen you in the entire time that you'd been on your journey. Very emotional scenes. A lovely, cute photo of her. She had a little balloon that said "Welcome Home" on it. It was so sweet.
Yeah.
What did that feel like to have your family surrounded by you in that moment in the celebration? And she walked the last little steps with you to Hammersmith Studios.
I mean, yeah. That's something I did not imagine at all. For the whole planning of this journey. Funnily enough, my mom had joined Strava to be able to see the progression of my journey, because obviously whenever I finish a run, the finish route or the run I finish uploads automatically onto Strava, and there's a big community there, and she became part of the community on that platform. Because she doesn't really engage with all the other platforms. But she can see, and I guess the pride came from that, from her side. And I really got the energy, how proud she was throughout the journey, when she made a comment through Strava, and when she saw people celebrating or making comments and giving me words of encouragement. through that. So I guess that her deciding to do the last part of the distance with me was because of that energy that she had got, and the pride that she has received, and also that at one point she felt that was it. When I disappeared, like she'll never see me again. I mean, you can see her crying at the finish, and myself, and knowing that was our greatest fear, like to lose her son and not know what to do about it or how to approach it. So when I finished, and I was so overjoyed, I finished and it was like, I've been thinking a bit more about her journey and her migration journey into the UK. My mom's migration journey is a representation of so many people that had migrated into these countries in Europe, the UK, but had faced so much difficulty being here, especially during that time. They would have faced a lot of racial discrimination, especially back then. But being able to just say, I'm here for a reason, so I'm going to follow through. Even if I'm not wanted, not liked, I'm just going to follow through, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to have my loved ones join me. So her work was basically to get me and my sister to come. So me and my sister came and joined her here in the UK. So that's a lot for a person to take on, because we leave when we migrate, especially when we have to migrate for reasons such as opportunities or forced otherwise. We leave somebody behind. We leave a family member behind. And it just happened to be at that time, my mom had to leave us behind. So later on, she can get us to come and join her. This part of the story doesn't normally get told. It's just always like, they come here, regardless what circumstances they come in, is that they just come here to just, fade off the community, the economy, and there's nothing else. But you come here actually to benefit the country. And going back to what we were talking about, is that nobody leaves their home, usually not willingly, not because they're just like, I'm just gonna go and leave, but it's because there's a greater purpose to doing so. So I was thinking a lot more about that and my mom's journey, and because she had made it easier for me and my siblings to actually, when we did come here, it was more of an easier process. Even though we faced challenges, it was much more easier.
There's so many parallels there between your mom's journey and the journey that you went on. Some of them you talked about some of the experiences you've had to endure along the way, but also in the face of adversity, how you just continued to push on. And you knew that this journey had a greater purpose if you were to complete it, and that was your main mission, and nothing was going to stop you not completing the mission to get from Cape Town to London. But that journey has stopped, and you have completed it, and your body is recovering at the moment. But what are the thoughts about how the legacy of your journey continues going forward? Where do you see your own, because I said, when I witnessed you finish this journey and you spoke to the crowd several times in different locations, and I saw a different Deo than the Deo that I saw leave. You had so much confidence, and you seemed like you had so much more of a purpose. And this wasn't the ending of a journey, this was the start of another one, and you were driven from all the experiences that you had encountered along the way in order to take that forward, to be a voice?
Yeah. This is the beginning of a bigger purpose. And I don't mean that in a running adventure way. It's more of a beginning of putting into place procedures, ensuring that people who are in Africa, their eyes are more open and understanding on when they do come to these countries, Europe and the global north, they are aware of what they're going to encounter. You know, it's not like you just come here and it's all roses. You actually need to come here and understand what you're about to embark on. And those who are actually leaving the global north too, and they're going back home, for example, they go back to Africa or other southern parts of the globe, they can feel a bit more at ease, so they don't feel like Africa is dangerous, for example, because that's what I always get. That's the narrative that gets told, that you go to Africa, it's dangerous. Why would you go there? Now there's a bit more of an understanding that there's a massive community welcoming people who are willing to support you when you go back. But more greatly, it's more about perseverance, and the obstacles that we thought were in our way, they're no longer there. And if they're there, we are going to brush them aside, and we are going to make sure that those obstacles don't stand in the way for the greater cause. So the next generation can understand that too. That if they're going to take on something so great, they are not letting any barriers prevent them from what they're doing. For me, I am ensuring that my goal is not to be remembered as the man who ran from Cape Town to London. It's me being remembered, my legacy being the person who is dedicating his life to ending racism. And that is the next chapter of this journey. So it's not ending, it's evolving.
Through so much of what we've learned from talking to you, this journey was so much more than just the run. The run was just the vehicle in order to travel through the land, to have these experiences, to tell a bigger story and paint the picture. But it also showed that you were willing to endure for your fight, because this was a very physical challenge. I suppose to close things, I know you want to speak about some of the people who have helped you on this journey. So almost like in the rolling credits. I suppose this wasn't just you completing the run. This is so much more than that.
Yeah. It's the power of community and having a team, because one is you have one person who's running and putting themselves on the line, but it's also the people you leave behind are also living and breathing this journey with you. And for me, it's Alice, who had lived and breathed the journey with me. Alice has done so much to be, being part of this journey and being the project manager. It's it's incredible. Sometimes staying up late nights, 1 a.m, and trying to figure out things. It just shows a testament to the person that she is, and the courage that she has to be able to deal with so much. Honestly, it's a lot, and sometimes I felt like, how is she able to do this? So I will always have so much respect for what she has done and continues to do. I had my drivers for jumping along and saying, okay, you know what? we don't know what we're getting ourselves into, but let's come and help you. I had Huma, I had Nasi, I had Mulundo, I had Mohammed, and also Pax, who was there, supporting me at the very first initial beginning where he was crewing me. And then the likes of you yourself, you're also part of this in the background, where people don't really know. Having Bain, who jumped on at the European leg, and a whiz at doing the routes and route planning. It's incredible how he did that.
I was speaking to him as well about that. It wasn't just like plotting an A to B for you. He was like checking on Street View and like working out if it was safe to travel, and all these little details which he was putting in to make sure that your journey was as effortless as possible.
100%. He was using so many different apps just to put one route together. That is incredible, what he did. Having my medical team who were like at the end of the phone, like, right, Rainy, please, can you help me with the nutrition? What do I need to do, especially when I came out of prison and I had difficulty with, issues with my stomach. And Sophie, who my physio, and helping in any way possible with any niggles I had. And it's not just because I've been so good at maintaining my body, but because she has been at the end of the phone, even at the middle of the night. And the other part of the team, like Trina, was started off at the beginning, and the extended guys who started off at the beginning, who are all coming together to support. And the community, the community has been incredible in the ways they can come together to support offline and online. It shows the power of community social media as well, and again, the sponsors that have helped to get me on this journey, to ensure that I have some funds to finish this journey. Yeah.
Would you do it again?
No. I think that's a simple no, because I have done it and I know what it entails. And I think, like, if you was to say that, would I do it again, not having done it before? For the cause, yes. And I would say that having some better intel into the journey, that would help a lot in terms of actually being able to deal with a lot of the issues that we faced.
Somewhat that's or sometimes part of the adventure is going into the unknown, and is having some stories to tell at the end of it, whether good or bad. I know there's so much that is still you need to decompress from a journey of this magnitude, and also settling back into somewhat of a normal life, because your life for a year and a half has been on the move every day, sleeping in a different location every day, not knowing where you're getting your food, water and shelter every day. And I know that you're decompressing so much physically, but also mentally. You're reconnecting with so many more people again that you've not seen. So I look forward to supporting you in the future on your endeavors, in your mission. And I look forward to seeing how that, journey takes shape. But in the near future, in the near time, I just wish you the best of all your recovery. And I just hope you can find some normality in running around Hyde Park again with a bunch of friends. They're just slightly different to what you've been doing in the past. But I hope you can kind of find some more joy and love back with running again when your body is ready for it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Just to be able to say, I'm just going to go out and do a 10K distance or a 20K distance as my maximum distance without having to feel like I need to go over, under, or without the pressure, and just be able to run with the community just for the fun of it and the love of it.
Well, I think I speak for a lot of people, and that we're really looking forward to, the day when we can run with you again. Deo, thank you very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. great to chat again.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes, where you'll also find links to things mentioned in the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find, and I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.